Hello everyone, welcome to a new section of the course, Components, Understanding and Using. In this section, we will use components in our applications and see some interesting directives in action. That being said, in this section, we are going to revisit the components topic and review what components are, create components for our applications, learn what single-file components are, learn how to achieve reactive CSS transitions with special attributes. Let's start with the first video of the section, Revisiting Components and Their Benefits. In this video, we will create a component, cover things such as handling data and EL properties inside a component, component templates, scope, and preprocessors. As you surely remember from the previous sections, components are special parts of the Vue application that have their own scope of data and methods. Components can be used and reused throughout the application. In the previous section, you learned that a component is created by using the Vue.extend method and registered using the Vue.component syntax. So, in order to create and use a component, we would write a JavaScript code. So we look at the example 1.html file here. First, we will add the JavaScript code. Then we will use hello-component inside the HTML. Both initialization and registration can be written as a single Vue.component invocation with corresponding options. Now let's look at the benefits of using components. There are some things that we need to learn before going deep into the components and rewrite our applications using them. Start with declaring templates in HTML. In our previous example, we created a Vue component with a template written as a string. It's actually easy and nice because we have everything we need inside our component. Now imagine our component with a more complex HTML structure. Writing a complex HTML string template is error-prone, ugly, and against best practices. By best practices, I mean clean and maintainable code. Complex HTML written as a string is anything but maintainable. Vue allows declaring templates inside an HTML file within a special template tag. So to rewrite our example, we will declare an HTML tag template with the corresponding markup inside. And then inside our component, instead of the HTML string, we will just use the ID of the template. Our whole code will look like this. In the preceding example, we had only used the template attribute for the component. Let's move on and see how the data and EL attributes should be treated inside a component. As already mentioned, the component syntax is the same as the Vue instances syntax, but it must extend the Vue instead of calling it directly. With this premise, it seems correct to create a component hello component, like this. But this would lead to a scope leak. Every instance of hello component would share the same data and EL, and this is not exactly what we want. That is why Vue explicitly demands to declare these properties as functions. Even if you make a mistake and declare the data or the EL properties as an object or an element, Vue will kindly warn you. Moving on to scope of the components. As already mentioned, all components have their own scope that is inaccessible by other components. Nevertheless, the global application scope is accessible by all the registered components. You can see the component scope as local and the application scope as global scopes. It's the same. However, using the parent data inside a component is not straightforward. You have to explicitly indicate inside a component which parent data properties should be accessed using the prop attribute, and bind them to the component instance using the vbind syntax. Let's see how it works on our hello component example. Let's start by declaring hello component with data that contains the attribute MSG. I have already created a Vue component. Here we have created a Vue instance. Let's add some data in it. Inside our HTML, we have created a template and apply it to the component using the template's ID. So here is the template. I will just put a comments here so I understand what it is for. In order to see the component on the page, we should invoke it inside the HTML of our app container. Now, if you open the page in the browser, you will only see hello. The user data property is still not bound to the component. In order to bind the data from the parent Vue application, we have to indicate this property inside of the prop attribute of a component and bind it to the hello component invocation. Open the index.html file and you can see the prop added here. I have used the vBindUser in the hello component. Refresh the page and you will see how it now presents you with a greeting. After the correct binding of the parent data property to the component, everything works as expected. Actually, the vBindUser syntax can be shortcut just by using this tag. Now we will talk about components inside other components. The beauty of the components is that they can be used and reused inside other components as Lego bricks and blocks. Let's build another component. Let's call it Greetings, which will be composed of two sub-components, the form asking for the user's name and our hello component. In order to do this, let's declare the template for the form and our already familiar hello template. We will modify our code in index.html file. I will add the code with the label. Here is the label with the vBind value. Here is the template for saying hello. Now we will register two Vue components based on these templates. This is the register form component. Finally, we will create our greetings template that will use both form and hello components. Do not forget that we have to bind the user property on the component's invocation. At this point, we can create our greetings component and use the greetings template inside it. We will replace this with the greeting component. Let's initialize which data function with the name of the user in this component. Here, our username is hero. Inside our main application container, we will now invoke the greetings component. Do not forget to initialize the Vue application, then save the file. Open the page in the browser. You should see this. There is a question asking for your name. Try to change the name in the input. You are expecting it to change also in the greetings header because we bound it to it. But strangely, it doesn't change. Well, this is actually the normal behavior. By default, all props follow one-way data binding. This means that if the data changes within the parent scope, these changes are propagated to the child component, but not vice versa. It is done this way in order to prevent children components from accidentally mutating the parent state. It is, however, possible to force children components to communicate with their parents by invoking events. Check the Vue documentation here. In our case, we can bind a user model to our form input component and emit the input event every time the user types in the input box. We achieve it by using the vOnInput modifier, just like it is described in this section at this link. Thus, we have to pass vModelUser to form component. Then form component should accept the value prop and emit the input event. Here is the code for emit and input bind. The input box inside the form component template should bind the vOnInput and the onInput method to the vOnInput modifier. Actually, prior to Vue 2.0, this kind of two-way synchronization between components and their parents was possible by explicitly telling the property being bound to sync using the .sync modifier like this. So here is the modifier. So now refresh the page. Now you can change the name inside the input and it is immediately propagated to the parent scope, and thus to other children components that rely on this property. You can find the complete code for this example in the JS fiddle at this link. So here is the HTML code, here is the JavaScript code, and this is the output. Before the Vue 2.0 release, there was one more data binding modifier, .once. With this modifier, the data would be bound only once, and any other changes would not affect the state of components. Look at these statements and compare them. Excellent! We have understood components in this video.